So
Oh,
it appears that I have my very first rival. This is Paul from England. How are you doing, Paul?
Hey, how are you?
Doing well. It's good to hear from you again.
Yeah, you too. My question was really just about the Kalam. Obviously, it's one of the most popular arguments to use. I just wanted to know why you personally don't really see how it works. I mean, I would assume that you don't anyway, but yeah, I just wanted to hear your opinion on the argument.
BrainBug, you want to start with this one, or do you want me to go for it?
okay. So, Paul, let's just start with the first premise and see how far we can get into it. What you go ahead and state your first premise for the Kalam.
Well, I guess I'll start with the most common version. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, the most common version, whatever. Yeah, whatever begins to exist, or whatever exists had a beginning, right? Or yeah.
No, it would be wherever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause.
Okay, so what begins to exist? What are we familiar with that begins to exist?
Yeah, we haven't got any examples of things that begins to exist so far.
Right.
We know things that just change from one state to another.
Right. So how do we get past that first step of the Kalam if we can't even demonstrate that things begin to exist? That's what snags me up. How do we get past that? And we move past that and we get into causality of, okay, so something begins to exist because you're putting begins before time. Now time is it's a temporal concept. So causality is part of its description is to be within a temporal framework. So causality, as far as I can tell, doesn't work outside of a temporal framework. So having one action cause another, having a prime mover, all these notions of what started the universe, what created things in its current state that hinge on this prime mover concept, they don't seem to engage with the fact that we're talking about before Planck time. Now, if an argument could be made that there was a different temporal framework outside of Planck time that we know, yeah, that's possible, but I don't know that there's any information about it.
Okay, well, there were two things you said there. The first thing is we aren't exactly saying that that things begin to exist because of our experience. We're saying that it's possible for things to exist. For things to begin to exist. In other words, there isn't a contradiction in saying that. And also because if things keep on just rearranging from a previous state, then you would have an infinite regress. And proponents of the Kalam don't accept that there are problems with infinite regress.
Doesn't the Kalam lead to an infinite regress when you get to the end of it? Because you're an eternal.
No. Because they said that everything that begins to exist has a cause. If something doesn't begin to exist, then it doesn't need a cause. Am I anywhere in the ballpark here, Paul?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. See, but that then now we get into a whole completely different set of problems. The first of which is for me is that, again, everything that begins to exist, right? Like don't have a lot of examples of things that have begun to exist. Everything that we know of is just a rearrangement of other matter or energy. So okay, so now what? Like what how can you say that everything that begins to exist if we have no way of looking back at what began to exist? And then the very end of it, and this is the big problem for me, is okay, it has a cause. Okay, fantastic, it has a cause. Now what? It's like we don't know enough about physics, about our reality, even to be even able to guess as to what that cause is with any reasonable measure of confidence. And the usual extension then of the Kalam is that it must be what is it? Oh, let me see if I get this. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and powerful and personal, right? Like how do you even begin to come to those conclusions? Like the weirdest one is powerful. Right? Like, how do you know what kind of power it takes to do the snap that it takes to kick off whatever it is that started the universe? I don't know what it is. But then I look at something like a forest fire. It doesn't take something very powerful. As devastating as a forest fire is, it takes a spark. one little tiny spark, not very powerful. And if it was in the wrong conditions, nothing happens. But it was just the right conditions where something not very powerful caused a tremendous amount of devastation. So there are so many problems I have with the not just the kalam, but then the extension of the kalam when you start looking at what must this cause be, because you have no way of meaningfully investigating that cause. And the only thing that tells me about the people who are coming up to conclusions about that is that it's not based on a complete understanding of what exactly it would take to cause the start of a universe. So what am I missing, Paul?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that in order to do away with the notion of things beginning to exist, I suppose you'd have to say that because we see no things beginning to exist, therefore the concept of things beginning to exist can't be the case. It can't be true, and that would be a black swan fallacy. Merely because there isn't any evidence for a claim doesn't mean that claim is false. So merely because we don't see things beginning to exist doesn't mean that that's not the case.
No, I agree, but it does also mean that we don't jump to conclusions about what that cause is.
We don't get past the first step of the kalam that way. That's the problem. We can't move forward with the kalam if we can't accept that, if we don't have evidence to believe, not to disbelieve. We're not saying we don't believe that everything that exists began to exist. We're saying that the evidence doesn't show that from what we can see. No evidence yet.
Yeah, but we're not relying on evidence in this case. This isn't like our science can't really help us as much when we're going this far back. And when we're talking about things that are this far away from our everyday experience, really this is about logic. So when I say whatever begins to exist has a cause, and you have a problem with me saying things can begin to exist because we don't see that in everyday experience, I'm merely saying that this is possible. I'm not saying that, that we need to see
it's logic.
We'll grant you possible. What we don't grant you is why should we do anything about that possibility?
Well, you don't need to do anything about the possibility. All I need is the possibility for that part of the argument to actually, work.
Again, I think you said you completely lost both of us. Try that again.
All you need is the concept of things beginning to exist being possible for the argument to work. I don't have to provide that is the case.
Accepting that all things had a cause is accepting the possibility that all things may have had a cause is all you're asking for in the first step of the kalam, because every time I've engaged with it, that's been no. We need you to accept that this is a fact, that all things that exist had a cause.
Are we rewriting this? It's like everything that begins to exist had a possible cause for its existence,
right? So, accepting that
the first premise is whatever begins to exist has a cause. You said, why bother talking about things beginning to exist when we don't see that in everyday experience? I'm saying that it's merely possible, so it's fine for us to talk about it. Okay,
so it's possible, but you're still not saying that it's definite, right? Or am I missing something?
I'm saying that it's possible for things to begin to exist. Whether everything that begins to exist has a cause is a separate thing. So if you'd like to talk about that, then that's fine.
Help the pragmatist here, Paul. Like, why are we talking about things if they are possible, if we're not coming up with an actual this is happening, let's figure out why? I mean, why are we armchair philosophizing? What are we trying to get to here?
Well, I asked for your opinions on the kalam, and then you said that, well, one of the two of you said that you don't see the point in saying that, in having things beginning to exist when we don't see that in everyday experience.
I don't know if it was everyday experience. We don't see that at all. Is the thing. It doesn't seem to be a product of the natural world that we see that things come into existence. We don't.
But it's still possible, so we can use that in the argument. When it comes to showing,
it is logically. There's no
there's that word possible again. Where's Matt when we need him?
Yeah, and maybe I'm speaking too soon because I know that they have detected protons. Is it that are coming into that'll pop into existence?
No, it's Jason.
Yeah, but we're getting into science there. We're trying to talk about philosophy. So going into what you're saying. Okay, so first premise weeks. Oh, let's accept it. Let's say we accept that under your terms, because that's not the way I've heard it worded before, but I'll accept that it is possible that all things had a cause. We can take that step. Okay, now move me to the second step.
I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just said that it's possible for things to begin to exist. The first premise, whatever begins to exist has a cause, actually does require evidence, and the evidence would be that if things the evidence, I guess, would be the overwhelming inductive evidence that we see in everyday experience.
Wait. How do we move from where we can't say that this is something we don't deal with every day to this is something like how did we smuggle that back in? What did I miss?
Well, your objection to the notion of things beginning to exist.
So it's possible for things to begin to exist, but again, it's possible doesn't mean it is. So why should we start on the branch of it is instead of it might not? Help me out.
Well, because
if it's possible, why are we acting like it's already the case? We just got to possible, not definite. So how are you getting to definite or not?
It's definite because mainly because of the impossibility of an infinite regress. If things are constantly there and is rearranging, then the reality would go back to basically it will go back to infinity, and that can't be the case because if there were an infinite amount of moments in the past, we could never actually arrive.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the typical objections to that. But again, what this tells me is that so the problem that I have here, Paul, is that physics as we know it and rules of physics and the laws of the universe, they don't scale very well, right? The ways that large objects move and the ways that very small objects move, they play by a complete.
I think Puck might be frozen up. Yeah.
What was that?
Give me just a second here. So when it comes to infinite regress, are you, Paul, under the impression that infinite regress would be in effect outside of Planck time?
Infinite regress would just be things going back and essentially having no beginning.
Right, which is beginning. Beginning is another temporal concept, right? It has it's an order of event. So is cause and effect. All these things are orders of event that exist inside a temporal framework. But in order for them to apply in the way the Kalam wants to interpret them, we have to apply them outside of the temporal framework.
Yeah. That was one aspect of the argument that I did struggle with. But the thing is, I suppose that the cause would occur in time. You would have whatever this first cause was, and the instant that it causes the universe to come into existence would be the instant that time starts. So it would happen within time. It's called simultaneous causation. It's quite difficult.
I'm familiar with that pushback against it, but so much of this depends on being within time. So you would argue that with the creation event, are you proposing a creator in this scenario, the hypothetical that we're going through at the end of it when you're for your Kalam? Yeah. Okay, because some people, and it's true, in my opinion, that the Kalam does not lead us specifically to a deity, but so I always like to try to ask and make sure that the person I'm engaging with, whether they believe it does or not. So what is the proposition that the entity came into existence and started moving at the same time as well? There's simultaneous causality there as well.
Yeah, essentially that this first cause would be timeless, and that would put it in a very strange situation in which it can't create, and in which it can't really change. But obviously, we have the universe here, so the instant in which it causes the universe would be the first change. And at the first change, time would start existing. So that would be fine in that case. I mean, I guess that answers what you said.
It gets hard to speculate on things like that, really, doesn't it? The concept of timelessness in itself, what kind of nature would that, what would we be looking at with something like that? What kind of properties will we expect? There's a lot of speculation there that I'm not prepared to make that jump as to.
It isn't really like much of a jump, to be honest. It's kind of just saying that physical reality can't keep on going back, and since that's the case, obviously you would need to accept that in the first place.
Okay, well, so like I said, the big thing from here, for me anyway, is that, and I do have to apologize because you always call and we don't have a lot of time to talk, and so we gotta start wrapping this up. But I suppose where I'm coming from here is that, like I was saying before I disappeared momentarily, that we don't have a lot of understanding of a lot of things, and to say that infinite regress is impossible. Sure, it seems impossible to us, but we really don't know what time looks like that close. So if we don't know, then how are we coming to any sort of conclusion? Like the big question is why we don't like the Kalam, or why we're not convinced with the Kalam. And the reason is because of all the things you're talking about. You're seeing things like possible, and yours, and now you lead to different conclusions about what this causes. There's too many I don't knows. There's too many unknowns that are filled with something that does make some logical sense. I'll give you that. It's not completely arbitrary and out of nowhere, but it's also nowhere near definitive. And as much as we can armchair philosophize this and say, well, I can't think of any reason why this couldn't be, then that just shows the limit of our understanding of the physics of not just the universe, but what it takes to start universes. And I think it should start with, I don't know enough about universes to be able to say what causes them, instead of saying, ooh, if it does have a cause, then I know that it must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, personal, and powerful. Let's start with, I don't know. Yeah. Let's start looking.
Yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, I suppose, because obviously, like, our science doesn't really, and our physics doesn't really allow us to take a very detailed look at these abstract concepts, which is why I kind of try to focus on, purely logical exercises and, impossibility of infinite regress, cause and effect, and, kind of metaphysical things. But this kind of argument is pretty difficult to explain well, and I can understand why you would see problems with it.
Okay. Right. Well, Paul, you know what? You're starting to become a fun rival for me. So, like you called the last time I was here, and you're calling this time. I hope the conversations continue. If you heard the various ways that you can keep in contact with us, please do so, because you're right. This is, it's a good mental exercise and it's a lot of fun, but unfortunately, it's not getting us to look at the Kalam and say, yeah, absolutely, I agree with everything that says, up to and including what that cause must be. So I hope we can look forward to being in contact with you again.
Yeah, Paul, I do enjoy talking about the Kalam, so I wouldn't be against talking to you again on some platform. So yeah, hit me out.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul.
See you, bye.